The Tarkin Doctrine. Big, slow, and meaty capital ships. Rebel X-Wings armed with hyperdrives and proton torpedoes. These three factors led clearly to the downfall of the Empire. The Alliance took advantage of Imperial design choices dictated by the Tarkin Doctrine, striking at weak points within the Imperial Navy. On a surface level, Alliance starfighters could outgun Imperial TIEs 9 times out of 10, while easily avoiding big capital ship guns during most individual battles. This gave them a unique advantage. But it was more than that. The Alliance used their significant starfighter advantage to strike at enemy capital ships, convoys, and bases, with, again, starfighters being the key to the Alliance's waging of perhaps the greatest guerrilla war in Star Wars history. The X-Wing had a hyperdrive, rare for a fighter of its size during the Imperial era. That meant it could jump into battle without any sort of escort fleet, and it could immediately engage the enemy. X-Wings were also shielded, fast, and armed with ordnance which could cripple or even destroy enemy capital ships. As the Essential Guide to Warfare explains, although Rebel fighters were limited in number, the Alliance did a really great job of choosing weak targets and attacking only when they had strength, and only when the results would be spectacular. This meant launching attacks on Imperial Star Destroyers, or bases which didn't have pre-launched fighters. And on that note, TIE fighters were not only ineffective compared to the much better Rebel fighters, but the time it took them to launch allowed the Alliance more than enough opportunity to inflict costly damage. Imperial turbo lasers and laser cannons were the only real defense in this situation, but the latter were largely abandoned in favor of the former, and X-Wings could simply fly around their defenses. Bring in other fighters like the Alliance B-Wing, Y-Wing, and A-Wing, and it's clear why Rebel starfighter squadrons often inflicted hundreds of casualties with only a few losses. Obviously, the deficiency here is the lack of true anti-fighter vessels. Now, there were frigates and corvettes in existence. The Carrack is one example, but like the Nebulon B, was not a true anti-starfighter vessel. It was armed with turbo lasers and was fairly clunky. There was, however, one vessel absolutely perfect for the role: the Lancer class frigate. The Essential Guide to Warfare explains that the Lancer was pushed into production by the suggestion of Admiral Ilan Drez, and meant specifically as a counter to Rebel starfighter raids after the first Death Star's destruction. However, Lancers were completely underused until Thrawn took control of the Imperial military after Endor. We'll come back to this, but first a little about the ship. Lancers were fast. They were armed with 20 quad laser cannons and could serve with a fairly small crew. The speed is really a bit of an underconsidered feature. Imperial Star Destroyers were very fast in their own right, and often, either during battle or just when in formation, they would accidentally outrun and leave their escort ships behind. This probably wouldn't happen with the Lancer, and although some sources have called it a slow capital ship, when they actually see action in the Thrawn trilogy and X-Wing novels, they're described as fast. So I'll side with the primary sources, which are generally more up-to-date and reliable. Regardless, the ship was incredibly effective in its role, and there's no debating that. One thing notable is that the Lancer didn't try to be a multi-role frigate like the Carrack. It lacked turbo lasers completely, instead dedicating its 250 meters entirely to point defense cannons. The Lancer was so deadly and so good at destroying starfighters that it even scared the Great Wedge Antilles. Here's a quote from X-Wing Rogue Squadron. 2 ships, Carrack-class cruiser and a Lancer-class frigate, are in our exit vector. Wedge felt his stomach begin to fold in on itself. Control, confirm Lancer-class frigate. They're rare. Maybe this is a mistake. Please let it be a mistake. Confirm Lancer-class frigate. Orders? Lancer-class frigates had been the Imperial Navy solution to the problem of snub fighters and the threat they posed to capital ships. All of 250 meters long, the boxy ships were studded with 20 gunnery towers, each one sporting a Scinar Fleet System quad laser array. With its speed, which was exceptional for a big ship, and those weapons, the Lancer class were rankers amid a nerf herd. The thing about Lancers, as we learn in this scene, is if they're situated located in a specific position, they can outrange starfighters and easily outfire them, while also standing up to a decent amount of damage. And Rogue Squadron really only makes it out of the situation because of some of Corran Horn's Force-aided trickery. Also, Grand Admiral Thrawn agreed with Wedge about the effectiveness of the Lancer, and actually used the capital ship effectively to cut through Alliance ships during his raids against the New Republic, ironically turning the Alliance's stateless strategy against them. With New Republic fighters neutralized, Imperial Star Destroyers, which were much more powerful than their Rebel contemporaries, at least when talking about turbo lasers, could operate properly in their niche. Not surprisingly, Thrawn didn't lose a straight-up battle during the war, and almost never lost Star Destroyers. Unfortunately, the architects of the pre-Endor Imperial Navy and the individuals responsible for Imperial battle groups didn't have the same foresight as Myth Ra Nurodo. Starfighters, which were cheaper and arguably more flexible than the Lancer, were preferred instead. So, as the Imperial fleet remained largely made up of Imperial Star Destroyers, Lancers were mostly relegated to Outer Rim patrols. The Battle of Endor itself saw a Rebel X-Wing kill the Death Star, a Rebel A-Wing killed the Executor. Squadrons of B-Wings tore through Star Destroyers like paper, and it's clear to me that a more balanced fleet could have done a lot to protect important Imperial targets. It's also clear how more secure Imperial supply lines could have helped the war effort, and although I've given some credit to the Tarkin Doctrine from a philosophical standpoint, there's no excuse for not throwing some of your money towards reasonableness. Cancel Palpatine's ridiculous battle moons and a few of the less important dreadnoughts, and try to give every Imperial fleet a couple of Lancers. I guarantee it would have made a big difference, and had Lancers been present at the Battle of Endor in numbers, I truly think the Alliance would have lost the war. Guard the Executor, a ship notable for being weak to starfighter runs close to its hull with some Lancers. Put one in front of the Death Star opening, and I think things turn out quite differently. Anyway, that is all for today, but before I leave, I do want to answer my question of the day. Today, Trent asks, do you think that Jacen Solo's fall to the dark side was poorly written / executed? And my answer is no. I actually think Jacen's fall makes more sense. He's got a basis for it, his torture by the Vong and the teaching of Regier during the Yuuzhan Vong War, and his actions are almost sympathetic in that he wants a galaxy free of destruction and chaos. We see things falling apart around him, and we see him doing evil things for the right reasons. Also, his turn is much more gradual. It starts off with raiding innocent civilians, killing people during investigations, and eventually firing on his own family and taking up the Sith moniker of Caedus. That, however, is just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Anyway, until next time, guys, this has been Eckhart's Ladder. Have a great day, a great week, and as always, may the Force be with you.